said, I do think it's really important to acknowledge that the land that I create this podcast on is the occupied unceded seas territory of both the Wichita and Caddo affiliated tribes. And another reason I think it's really important to acknowledge this is because I also think it's important to acknowledge that there are valid ways of knowing that are not only the Western ways of knowing. I think we tend to think that like science and our typical core four are the ways that we know things, and that's the only way to know things. But I've found in my journey through chemistry and doing this podcast that that's definitely not true. So I definitely want to acknowledge the ways of knowing that came before. And I also think if we're all going to be hanging out together for an hour, it's important for you to know who you're talking to. And also, I think this plays really into why I chose to reach students the way I did. So I'm Melissa. I have my master's degree in organic chemistry. I really love science. I did not do well in organic chemistry the first time I took it. I've had to retake this course many times. But I eventually got it, and I loved it so much that I got a master's degree in it. And then I also, obviously, am the co-host of the podcast Chemistry for Your Life. That's my co-host, Jam. And we actually are the top ranked chemistry podcast in the United States, according to Apple Podcasts. So that's really exciting. Yay. I'm also a student. These are my advisors here on our Christmas sweater party. I'm a grad student working on my PhD in chemistry education research, which is a data-based area of research. So we try to use data to identify how students are learning chemistry and then take that and implement it in the classroom to improve their learning process. And then I'm also a teacher. I'm a teaching fellow. I'm an instructor of record at the University of North Texas. I teach organic chemistry, and I was a TA for about 6 years before I took on that position. So I've done a lot of teaching, and I really, really love teaching, especially organic chemistry. So that's who I am. I really have tried to make my mission be the thing that drives me towards diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think you'll see this mission statement ties into the theme today really well. And it also is what drove me towards creating my podcast. So my mission is to make learning chemistry fun, interesting, and useful for learners of all ages, genders, races, and socioeconomic statuses, and that's both inside and outside of formal education. So a lot of my other fellow teachers have tended to focus on education in the classroom, but I think that being in a college classroom is a privilege, right? So I also want to really teach people outside of those spaces. So that's who I am professionally. But I think it's also important as an educator to recognize that we are whole people, and so are our students. So I wanted to tell y'all some about me. I am a wife. I got married newly this summer, very exciting. And I'm also a daughter. That's my mom's wedding dress that I wore to get married. And I'm a sister, I'm an aunt, I'm also a plant mom. I love my plants. This is like 1/4 of my full plant collection. Once people find out you like plants, they just give you plants. That's what happens. And I love every one of them. I also am an avid baker. So recently we had a snow day up here in North Texas, and I spent that day making cinnamon rolls. I made my first ravioli recently. It was very exciting. And I love being outdoors, especially when it's not sunny. So this is one of my favorite pictures because it's raining that day. So that's a little about me, both personally and professionally, but I want to know about who I'm talking to today because I'm a podcaster, right? So my audience is really important to me. I want to know who y'all are, and I want to know what y'all are like. So please share with me your name and your work identity, and then also a non-work identity. Oh, and I'm going to hop back into the regular meeting frame for a second.
I guess I can go first. Hi, Melissa. I'm Brian Berger. I know we met back in November at the ACS conference. I'm a chemistry instructor at Alvin Community College. I also function as a faculty lead and distance education faculty fellow, and I've been trying to help with a lot of the IT stuff today. I'm also married, been married for 6 years. I have a beautiful daughter who's turning 1 on Wednesday next week, so we're pretty excited about that.
Oh.
And a lot of fun, crazy stuff is just going on. So it's just been kind of a lot of fun. I'm also a dog owner. I've got 2 crazy, wonderful dogs as well. One of them is behind me somewhere, but yeah, that's me.
Awesome. I'm so excited about your daughter turning 1. Has she started walking yet?
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah.
Trouble on 2 feet, I'm guessing.
Oh, for sure. No, she's a sweetheart, but she's having fun. I'll let my wife talk more about that later.
My name is Julie Hyman. I am a developmental education specialist here at ACC. I taught math for several years in junior high level, and then I was a math tutor here at ACC for a STEM grant, and so I worked with the developmental students through that, and that's how I got into this position, was trying to following that path. Outside of school, I am a cat mom. I have 2 orange tabbies, Lord Nibbler and Chewy. I've been married. We have not killed each other for 8 years. I've been married for 8 years, and we just have cats. I also am a brand new plant mom, but we're renting spaces, so all of mine live in pots outside. I'm still learning how to keep succulents alive inside. So.
Yes, I will say succulents and cats don't always go together. Many of them are poisonous to cats, so keep your eyes out for that. And many of them look like tasty treats to cats, so it's like very bad.
I've only recently had the plants come back inside because I used to have a cat that would eat all the plants. These current cats don't seem interested, so I'll keep an eye on them though. Thanks for the warning.
Does anyone else want to hop in and share some about who they are?
I'm Ashley Massey. I'm an instructor of English, and I hope I'm not the oddball out here, but I thought this sounded like a really interesting session that I could learn from and incorporating stuff into my field. I work here at Alvin Community College, and I have for a few years, so I'm excited to hear more about your presentation.
I don't think you're the oddball out. I went into this thinking that I was not talking to mostly chemists, so hopefully you'll be able to follow along and not feel like, what is this chemist person talking about? All right. Well, I'll go ahead and hop back in. If anyone wants to be in the chat, that's absolutely okay. And I'll go ahead and share my screen again. I'm a Zoom person. So I'm not always positive on how to do things
So
here.
Melissa, in the upper left, there's a little square with an arrow pointing up.
Yes, I've got that, but when I click on window, for some reason, my PowerPoint's not there.
I just share the whole screen and then put the PowerPoint on, but
okay.
That's just me.
Great, I'll do that. Well, there you can all see yourself for just a second, probably. And here we go. Okay. So my next thing actually is going to be another slightly interactive situation. I'm an active learning specialist. I believe in active learning. So if y'all will pull out your phones and go to pollev.com/Melissa Collini, Melissa Coley 601, or you can just scan the QR code. Either of those should work. I'll need to flip over to activate this real quick. Let's see. And the URL is also here on the top. Can y'all see this screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. And this is, I want you to respond to the prompt, what comes to mind when you think of the word chemistry? And that's the subject, chemistry, not just chemistry with one another. And what's going to happen is you can send as many one-word answers as you want. And as you send in responses, they'll come up on the screen in a word cloud. And don't be afraid to hurt my feelings. My research is on how people feel about learning organic chemistry. So they have said many things over the years. So if they're not positive words, that's absolutely fine with me. Oh, discipline, that's a good one. Where do I lisp comes to mind? Teacher, passion. These are really good ones. I like how it rearranges. School, struggle, the struggle is real. That is a common one that I hear. Grignard, that's coming from a chemist for sure. Nice. Okay, well, I love that a lot of these words are kind of positive, like passion, discipline. A lot of times I get like explosion and hard. And when I tell people that I'm a chemistry teacher or that I study chemistry, a lot of times the response I get is, wow, you must be so smart, or wow, chemistry is really hard and I hated it. And That was a pretty discouraging thing for me to hear because I didn't believe that you had to be so smart. I think, you have to work really hard sometimes in a chemistry class, but I didn't succeed the first time I took it. And I'd grown to really see chemistry as something really beautiful instead of something really hard and scary. And so this is how I see chemistry as opposed to how my students see it. I see chemistry in the onions that we cut that make us cry. That's a chemical reaction. I see chemistry in margarine and butter. So the reason margarine and butter act differently is because they're chemically different, and scientists actually invented margarine by doing a chemical reaction. And even when you wash your dishes, molecules are interacting in a way that allows the dish soap to take the oil off of your pan. So that's where I see chemistry. And where my students see chemistry, there's kind of a gap. And I'm sure some of you in your, we've got our English teacher and another chemist here, and I'm sure you also have seen sort of a gap in how you visualize the subject versus how the students do. And I've been trying to identify some issues with that. And one paper that reported some issues in chemistry curriculum that I think sort of contribute to that is our curriculum is really overloaded. I mean, we are throwing information at our students just at a rate that is sort of beyond what they could keep up with. And it's frustrating as an instructor because I know that they're not understanding, but because of what's required of me, I have to keep going. And so I'm sure some of you can identify with that. They also kind of don't see how it all connects. They feel like we're teaching them isolated facts and they're just memorizing them instead of making a big picture of how chemistry happens. And then they're not transferring topics or information from one topic to another. They don't really also see relevance of chemistry in their everyday life. So that one for me is pretty heartbreaking because I do think that chemistry is really relevant in everyday life. It's something that I've literally built a whole podcast around. But students often aren't getting that message in their classrooms. And so they really don't know why it's important for them to know how this thing works or how it matters in everyday life. And then we're not adequately emphasizing what's important for them to take away from each lesson and what's important for them to take with them to the next class. Because we're throwing so much information at them, it feels like we're just throwing a bunch of facts at them and they don't really know what's important to focus on and what's not. So these are some issues that we've found in chemistry curriculum that have probably contributed to the divide in how we visualize our subject as experts and instructors and what students are experiencing. And one way that I think lots of different fields, but especially in chemistry education, we focused on something called context-based learning to try to bridge that gap. So context-based learning aims to bring the subject closer to the life and interest of the learner. So we're going to take this lesson and situate it within a context that's relevant for our students rather than just throwing isolated facts at them. And one really extensive program within this is called Systems Thinking in Chemistry Education, where the whole semester is based on a system in everyday life like climate change or pollution. And every chemistry lesson is situated within that bigger picture so that the students really see the context. But context-based learning is linked to improved affect. That's like the feelings that the students are experiencing while they're learning. So that includes interest and motivation and attitudes. And I'm sure all of you who've ever sat in a class and hated it know that the way you feel about a class really impacts your learning experience. So this improved affect, improved feelings towards a course also can lead to improved performance. So context-based learning is one area that chemistry education is focusing on to really improve working on how students see chemistry. And so while I'm doing all these things, right, while I'm teaching and learning about context-based learning and hearing about how people hate chemistry or they think it's really hard and you have to be really smart to do chemistry, I also had something else happening at the same time, and that was I was exposed to podcasts. So this is another interactive thing. If you want to drop down in the chat ways that you absolutely, or what podcasts you absolutely love, I want to hear about them. But one of the first ones I ever listened to was actually assigned to me in my undergrad in a sophomore level course about evolution, and that was Radiolab. And I fell in love because I didn't really like listening to music. And so the fact that I could learn and drive around was incredible for me. So I first fell in love with this podcast, Radiolab. And after voraciously consuming that, I discovered there were other podcasts I didn't know. This one, More Perfect, also by Radiolab, is about the Supreme Court, which if you would have asked me in school, I would have thought was pretty lame, but this podcast made it so fun. I also consume some junk food podcasts, which are like true crime podcast. Anxious people like to learn about the bad things that can happen. This podcast will kill you seems like it's a true crime podcast, but actually it's a biology podcast. It's 2 PhDs in biology talking about how different diseases impact your body. It's a really great one. But this is probably the podcast that inspired me the most. So as a chemist, as someone who has heard so much about how people do not care about chemistry or how they don't seem that it's relevant, I had a similar attitude about architect and design. And so this podcast, 99% Invisible, is all about architecture and design. And I started listening to it sort of like another podcast I listened to played an episode of this one, and I was hooked. If you would have asked me if I thought architecture and design was interesting, I would have told you absolutely not. That sounds so boring and hard. I'm not going to be able to wrap my mind around it. I'm not a numbers person, but this podcast makes it interesting and accessible, and it does so for free. And my favorite example of this is, have you ever experienced trying to open or close a door, and consistently when you are going to use that door, you do the wrong thing? And even if it says like push on there, you still accidentally pull, or vice versa. So anyone who's experienced that also should appreciate this podcast, because what that means is not that you're incapable of using a door, but actually that the design of the door was wrong. Doors are meant to be intuitive. You're supposed to walk up to it and know how to use it and not think about it. And if you have to think about it, it's designed wrong. And that's known as a Norman door. So I was amazed that there was something in architecture and design that was relevant to my everyday life. And I learned about a concept in that field from a podcast. And that is really, I think, the podcast that inspired me that I could do the same thing and make learning in my subject interesting and accessible for my students, even though so many people felt that it wasn't an accessible topic. And part of what appealed to me about a podcast is that it solves a lot of these issues that I mentioned that are a problem in chemistry classrooms. It's not overloaded curriculum because it's outside of the class time. It's not isolated facts because we're teaching it in a context-based situation. There is transfer episode to episode. We'll tell students which other episodes this applies to. There's not a lack of relevance because we're talking about, we create the podcast to answer a question in everyday life. Recently, someone asked us how Pop Rocks, that candy that pops in your mouth, pop. And so it's very relevant because we answered their question. And we emphasize clearly which chemistry concepts are important for that episode each time. So it really does answer a lot of those questions. Plus, it has the benefit of being open access. So not only am I reaching students in a classroom to teach them about how chemistry relates to their everyday life, but anyone who has access to the internet can learn about chemistry. And that really is a privilege. I think that as people who are in the academic system day in and day out, we forget that going to college takes time and money and an adequate education beforehand. And a lot of people don't have those resources, unfortunately. And so if I can make it possible for someone to think chemistry is for them, even though they're not on campus, I think it's my obligation as a chemist to do that. And you can see how all these things really fulfill my mission of making chemistry fun, interesting, and useful for learners of all ages, genders, races, socioeconomic statuses, right? This is driving towards my goal of making chemistry fun, interesting, and useful for all these people in all these settings. So that's how I landed on doing a podcast, and thus Chemistry for Your Life was born. Thankfully, I had a close friend who was interested in creating podcasts, who also happened to be an audio engineer. He went to the University of North Texas along with me, and he is very smart. I'm really thankful to have him on my team. He did all of the behind the scenes work, but he also serves as my co-host. So JAM has absolutely no background in chemistry at all. And so I'll teach him a chemistry lesson, and he is learning it authentically right there on the spot as a non-chemist. And so he really serves as the audience in that situation, showing that chemistry can be taught to anyone, even someone whose background is not in chemistry at all. So for each episode, we identify a curiosity in everyday life, and thankfully our listeners send in a lot of those. So things like, how does soap get your dishes clean, or how Pop Rocks pop, or what's the chemistry behind skincare? And I will research that, but I really try to make sure that I am using good sources like peer-reviewed journal articles or other schools' websites that I know are trustworthy, because I don't want to spread misinformation, and I don't know about every topic. I try to make a cohesive lesson. I'm a storyteller, and Dr. White's talk, that's my kind of teaching, is I really want the lesson to be interesting and connect with and have a lot of empathy with my audience. So I try to make a cohesive lesson, and then we record. And when we record, that is the first time Jam is hearing about that chemistry lesson. That's the first time he's hearing about the topic. So people are genuinely experiencing an authentic learning process. Jam is really learning this for the very first time as a non-chemist. And then Jam will do a teach back. So I'm sure many people have used this in their classrooms, but essentially I make him tell me back the lesson of what he just learned. And that allows, it does sort of three things. One, it allows me to make sure that Jam understands the chemistry, and I can do some clarifying of any misconceptions. Two, it helps him learn it better. I'm sure as you taught your class, you have learned your subject a lot better as educators. That has definitely been my experience. And so it helps Jam to sort of solidify that lesson in his mind, and it allows him to ask questions, to stand in as the listener. So our listeners are getting that twice, and one of those times is in a completely non-chemist language. He uses everyday language to explain the topics back to me. And usually he comes up with a really good analogy too. My favorite one is, we did an episode on how caffeine works in your brain, and he compared it to musical chairs, which is very accurate, and I loved it. We always listen for accuracy, and then we post the episode. And Jam couldn't be here today, which makes me very sad, but I think my computer audio should be shared, so you should be able to get a little bit of experiencing what Jam is like through this. So let me know if you can hear it. It's a short clip.
Hey, I'm Melissa.
I'm Jam.
And I'm a chemist.
And I'm not.
And welcome to Chemistry for Your Life,
the podcast that helps you understand the chemistry of your everyday life.
I love using Bitmojis in my talks. Were you able to hear that?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay, great. Yeah, so I love using Bitmojis in my presentation because it gets a little bit of the personality of Jam to come here. So that's exciting to me. So that's our intro that we do every time, just to start out the episode and give people a little introduction on who we are. And so far, some topics that we've covered are how acids work, if Teflon pans are safe, cast iron pans also, and as an alternative. We've done a whole skincare series that has changed my life forever. I always thought that skincare was kind of like mumbo jumbo, but it's not. It's based in science. We had talked already about, we did an episode about caffeine, maple syrup, why onions make you cry, how bath bombs work, how diapers absorb all that liquid. And we also have used our platform to address things like, we did an episode on Black History Month. We talked about if science is always right, because there's been a lot of mistrust of that topic, as COVID-19 and all the misinformation about vaccines has been spread. So we try to use that platform to give people access to a chemist in everyday life, no matter where they're at. And we have, crazily enough, reached people all over the world. So this is a heat map kind of showing where we've reached people and taught our subjects. And then you can see like the light blue is where they've listened, and then where it gets darker, that's a higher concentration of listeners. So we have more listeners in the UK. I think that's Spain right there, and France we have a lot. Australia we have quite a few, in India, and then in the United States and Canada are probably our top 2 countries. And these are, February looks a little weird because I took this a few days ago, but these are our statistics for how many times people have listened. So in Podcasting, a download, and a stream are the same. They're considered the same. So we average between 20,000 and 33,000 people listening to this podcast every month. So I think people are finding it interesting, and I can't believe, but over the last 2 years, we've actually had almost 500,000 downloads, which blows my mind. People are learning about chemistry while I'm sleeping. They're learning about it from me while I'm asleep. It's incredible. But this is the conference about the classroom, right? So how has this impacted learning in the classroom? So here is one example. Jam and I have actually had the opportunity to go to a few high school classrooms and talk about the podcast with students in the classroom. And the questions they've asked us are just incredible. Someone asked why glass is clear, and someone else asked how, they're in a cold climate, so they've asked how does salting the roads make them safer and that kind of thing. So they're getting permission to think outside the box in their chemistry classrooms by listening to someone address all the chemistry in their everyday life, right? So they get to look at things in everyday life and start to wonder how that looks. We also did a poll on Instagram to ask some people how this podcast has impacted them. And this person right here is from Spain. She's also a chemist, and she said she's learned new day-to-day stuff too. This person, who was going to be an educator, changed their mind from teaching biology to chemistry. And several chemistry teachers responded and said they add the content into their class to make lessons more interesting. I love these two are really similar at the bottom. They are both scientists who work in the field, and the podcast really helped them restore their love for chemistry and their passion for learning. And I really love this one. It always makes me emotional. This is actually a friend of mine, and her mom is from Mexico, and she does not have any formal education, but she does have a lot of indigenous knowledge. And this friend of mine has always kind of dismissed that. And as we've talked about some of those topics in the classroom, or in the podcast, sorry, not in my classroom, she started to realize that her mom actually does have an understanding of chemistry. It just comes from a more indigenous perspective. And that's made her so proud of her mom. It makes me emotional every time I think about this, because this really shows the diversity that we're achieving in our podcast, is we're helping people see that science really is for everyone, and there's foundations of knowledge in all different areas from all different cultures. And so that makes me really, really proud. But it also just goes to show how much listening to context-based examples in your subject or relating students' information back to themselves can impact their excitement and passion for learning, instead of kind of just doing the rote everyday stuff. Like, there's a really important aspect to connecting to the emotional side of the learning experience. And then these are longer. I don't expect you to read all of them, but they were really important to me. I wanted to include them because I thought they went along with today's topics really well. So the first one is after we did an episode where we featured a Black chemist for Black History Month, he reached out and said, "Thank you so much. I'm Black, and to hear about another Black scientist is amazing." He's been really discouraged because even though he's had dozens of professors in his home country of Brazil and in the United States, he has only had like one or two that haven't been white or Asian. So he doesn't see people who look like him. And knowing that there are people who look like him who are in our field is really, really encouraging. So that was so exciting. And then I also thought this one was really appropriate. This is from an adjunct instructor at a community college who is teaching a course called The Science of Chemistry, who uses this in their curriculum as well. So I thought that that is a really innovative way to engage learners. And when I was a student and I was assigned a podcast, it really changed my life forever. So thinking of outside the box ways to reach our students where they already are, and a lot of them are already on their phone and a lot of them are already on the internet. So just throwing a podcast at them is not a huge leap for them, but can really make a difference in their learning experience. And then this one on the bottom is really fun. This is about a 2-year-old who memorized the whole periodic table, and now that he's 3, he listens to Chemistry for Your Life every day before he goes to bed. So if he can listen to it, I think that shows that it really is for everyone. But another important thing is, am I actually teaching chemistry? So maybe I'm making really interesting and fun content, but it really is important to me that people are gaining a deeper understanding of chemistry. And so to test that out, for our 100th episode, I actually asked Jam some questions. I made him take a test. And one that the chemistry instructors here will know is ask him what the weakest intermolecular forces are. And that's a question that I've taken from an exam for my Gen Chem students and my organic chemistry students.
If I remember correctly, I think it is dispersion forces. Is that right?
I love when he asks if he was right. He was right. It was dispersion forces. And he also knew,
If I remember.
He also knew the definition of a polymer, which is, I just flipped to the back of a chemistry book, asked him, I read that definition and asked him if he knew what it was, and he did. He knew the same thing for a functional group. And this one really was so exciting to me. I was going to do an episode on why our tires go flat in winter, and I asked Jam if he had any ideas as to why that might happen. And we'd been talking about heat and the way molecules move, and basically when there's more heat, molecules move more, and when there's less heat or less energy, molecules move less. And so Jam was able to predict that as it's colder, there's less heat, so the molecules move less, so that would put less pressure on the walls of the tire, and that's why they go flat. And when he said that, I was so proud, because that means he not only understands the concept at a macro level, but on the microscopic level, he understands the movement of molecules. He understands that molecules are even there, which is important as a chemist, and how they move based on their environment and the energy being put into them. So this is someone whose degree is in radio, television, and film, who thinks science is cool, but has never studied it formally, and he was able to predict that. And that was when I was like, okay, well, I guess you can start teaching now. That was very exciting to me. And he also used chemistry to improve his cooking. His water kept boiling over, and he knew how to add salt to it to reduce that boiling over. So it was very exciting to me as well. So I really do think that this has helped me reach and fulfill my mission. I think I have been able to reach learners and make chemistry, actually teach them chemistry and make it fun and interesting. And it's even been useful for Jam, for our learners of all ages. And also genders and races and socioeconomic statuses. I've heard from people in all of those areas. And I've seen it be used inside and outside of formal education settings in a way that makes learning more accessible. So I really think that trying to find ways to meet students where they're at and things they're already doing to improve their learning experience, to improve their interest and passion, is going to pay off in their long-term education, and really will help improve diversity, equity, and inclusion. I also, though, since we are at a community college talking about ways to reach students, I've also applied this in a few other ways in my formal classroom, not just in podcasting, but this idea that I'm trying to reach students where they're at and make chemistry accessible. And one way that I've done that is actually I created, during the COVID-19 pandemic, a YouTube channel where I literally just solve practice problems. It is very low production value. You can see it's a webcam that I got for free, and I'm just writing, solving problems. But what I'm doing while I'm solving these problems is I'm talking to my students about what I'm thinking and why I'm doing what I'm doing. And I did this as a last-ditch effort because no one was coming to my recitation sections, which was very, very disappointing. And I would spend all this time preparing and no one would come. But I think during COVID, we were all Zoomed out. And so what I decided to do was record my recitation sections and start posting them. And you can see a video that I posted in 8 hours got 23 views. That was more students than had come to my recitation in all of COVID combined. So I somehow found this tool as a way to reach students where they were at during the pandemic. And I think part of it is that they can pause and rewind, and they can understand how someone who's done a lot of these thinks when they approach a question, but also they can do it whenever they have time. So thinking about how many different types of students we have, students that work, students with different abilities, students with neurodivergencies, students who have children who are taking care of ill parents. All of these things are real situations that our students, who are whole people, are experiencing. And so I think having the instructor at their fingertips anytime they want, without us as the instructor actually having to be available to them, is really important. But I think it's also important that it's where they already are. So I don't know if y'all know, but I found out after I got married that a lot of people just watch YouTube like it's TV. There are morning shows that come up every day. If any of you know Good Mythical Morning, literally, they are just two weird guys on the internet. There are people who talk about cars. There are people who talk about minimalism. I mean, anything that you can think of, there's a YouTube channel for it, and our students are already on YouTube on their phones. So putting a resource where they don't have to go out of their way and they don't have to go onto this big scary Canvas thing, they're just going to YouTube, and they like YouTube, and it makes life easy. So they just go onto somewhere that they're comfortable being, and it's like it kind of removes a few of those steps that can be really hard when you feel like you don't know what's going on or when you don't have time, and makes it to where this is occurring on an app that is automatically installed in every single person's phone when they get it. And so I think that really makes a big difference. Another place a lot of our students are at is TikTok. And if my goal is to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion in the classroom and to have my students be able to learn chemistry, I felt like I had to go where they already were, and this has been one of my projects. Now, before you begin doing a TikTok, I really want to encourage you to have an accountability partner and put a time limit on your phone, because TikTok has a smart algorithm where they will find out what you like and only show you those videos, making it a time-sucking machine. So don't fall trapped to that, but use that to your advantage, because our students are already there scrolling. And I had the thought, if my students are already there scrolling, they already have this app on their phone, what if every once in a while a chemistry video came up on their app? It would make studying so much easier because they're just accidentally studying while they're scrolling, right? So I started to make these videos, and I've gotten a lot of good feedback on these. We use them both to do a semi-flipped classroom where we just introduce in a 3-minute video a little bit about the topic we're going to be teaching in class that day. And then we also use it to summarize what we've learned in class and to help them study for exams. So surprisingly, I was worried that both of these would kind of be flops. These were things I really did out of desperation to reach my students during the pandemic when it felt like I had no idea what was going on with them. But students have gone out of their way to thank me for making these resources. And as someone who's been an educator in the university system for about 7 years, no students have done this for most of the materials I've made. I've poured hours into making materials for my students, and they have received, this is 3 of about 20 emails that I've gotten where students have thanked me for making these videos. And I just really didn't expect this at all. But I think it just goes to show the power of taking this much more effort to try to meet our students where they're at and to try to teach them on a platform that's easy and accessible for them any time of the day, no matter where they are. That really makes a difference in their learning experience. So that's all I have for you today. I wanted to thank you so much for coming and listening. And I also need to thank Jam, because I would not be here. This podcast would not be possible without him, and the listeners of Chemistry for Your Life, especially those who have written in ideas and who have sent in questions and written to thank us, the reviewers for Chemistry for Your Life, and my advisors, and also all of you. So I have questions what I have, but I really would also like to hear what things y'all have done that have worked in your classroom. So I really am more interested in a discussion than just a question. I think we have about 10-15 minutes for that. So I'm gonna
Actually, about 20 minutes.
Oh, okay. I thought there was a 10-minute break between sessions, so I wasn't 100% sure.
Yeah, our session actually goes till 10:40, so we've got a lot of time.
Okay, all right. Well, there you go. And I haven't been able to see the chat this whole time, so oh, TikTok grammar videos. Yeah, that would be really great. Oh, I'm getting to see your podcast. This is amazing. Yes, I love 99% Invisible. Math therapy. I didn't know there was math podcast. That's really cool. Astronomy cast, Lindsay Elmore. What Roman Mars can learn. Roman Mars also does 99% invisible, I think, so that's really cool. I've heard I need to watch Star Talk. I've been told that. So, yeah. What questions do you have for me?
I'll help out with the directing. Ashley, I think you had your hand up first. I'll let you go first.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you. All of your ideas were really interesting and very helpful. I feel like I can apply it to English. So I was going to ask you about your podcast. I think that's really unique in making it applicable to life. And so I'm kind of thinking on the English side of things. Now, in your chemistry courses, did you ever take some of that podcast content and actually use it in the course at all? Or did you keep those two separate?
So I haven't used it in my course personally because I teach organic chemistry at the college level. The students are barely keeping up, and because I'm a teaching fellow and not a tenure track lecturer, I don't have the freedom to do what I want to do. So that's kind of unfortunate, just the program I'm in. But other instructors have taken the podcast and incorporated them into their classroom. So they either made it assignments, or I've heard from people who do podcast walks where their high school students get to go on a walk around the grounds and listen to an episode, and then they come back and share what they've learned and how it relates to the topics that they've learned this semester. And another person actually had their students listen to a few episodes and then make their own Chemistry for Your Life episode where they got to teach their like a fellow student about Chemistry for Your Life. They did a video presentation for it, not just audio, but yeah, so that's how I've seen it used in the classroom. I just haven't had the freedom to do that, unfortunately. I think it's really important, and once I have the freedom to do whatever I want in my classroom, I will. So that's been my experience.
Thank you so much. Those are great ideas. I love it.
And I do also want to hear some thoughts from y'all about what you think would work in the classroom as well, because I was hoping we could kind of have a little discussion here at the end.
So going back to that, you mentioned your TikTok videos. I do TikTok, but because I thought, well, maybe that will engage them more. And, it's only 1 to 3 minutes long. I thought maybe that would be better to give them shorter content. But, if it's not an assignment, they just don't want to do it. Anyway, the only ones who will listen to it are the students who really are struggling and want to succeed. And you get like maybe 1 to 2 of those in the class. And so I like the idea how you mentioned the flipped classroom and using it as a tool for that, because I think that would probably receive more student engagement. So, I'm trying to TikTok. It works for some people, but not most. And then my colleague and I, we actually thought that maybe doing skits for our online students instead of lectures would help out this semester. Obviously our acting is a 1 out of 10, but we thought, well, okay, put all our lecture content in skit format instead, so that way they're more interested in viewing it. And that's not going as well as we thought it would. I thought I would rather watch a skit than hear a lecture. So, but I'm thinking maybe if we do the whole flipped classroom thing, that's what should be required in order to get them engaged. So, great ideas. These are some of the things that we're doing, but they're not necessarily like the best idea, best working method. The things that I've learned that are helpful for student engagement, Jeopardy. So after we finish a lesson, we'll play Jeopardy to see how much they know about it, and they get very competitive, and that's really helpful. So they really enjoy the Jeopardy games.
We had a memory game that we did a recitation just a few days ago, and the prize was a bag of candy, like a $3 bag of candy, and I've never seen them that excited. I'm like, this is a bag of peach rings. Like, you guys probably don't even like this. I don't know, but they were so excited. So I definitely think gamifying things. And actually, one of the YouTubers I follow, Good Mythical Morning, they said they gamify everything they do because people are invested when it's a game. And so I've tried to bring some of that into my recitation. It's like, how can I make this a game? So Jeopardy is a really good idea. Also, I do want to say, not all of my students go onto my YouTube and my TikTok, but I guess I kind of feel like if I'm reaching those ones who are struggling and really want to do well, that's still something. And using it for the flipped classroom, we'll post those videos and I can see how many views I have. And it's not always the full number of people in my classroom, but if it's helping someone, I feel like it's worth doing it, right? A lot of times I have office hours and one or no students come, and these videos take less time than that to prepare. So I've kind of thought it's worth it. But yeah, I think the skits is also a really good idea. There's a lot of chemistry concepts that you could skit out. You could make the students make their own skit too and make them do it. That could be a fun assignment for them. Okay, so the semi-flipped classroom that we do, organic chemistry, is pretty complicated, and sometimes people will do all of their lectures remotely, and then in class time have the students solve practice problems, because it is a lot like math, where if you're not doing your practice problems, you're not learning this material. You can watch someone else do it and think you have a full understanding, but you really probably don't until you practice it and learn what little things need to be considered. And so we are concerned about that, because we do think there are people who don't have time or interest. And I think especially for neurodivergent students, listening to a 40 to an hour long lecture is not going to be conducive for them. So we did a semi-flipped classroom where we will introduce important bits of the topic. So I usually do 3 to 4 3-minute videos before class, and we post them as an announcement, or like, if you listen to these 4 videos, you're going to be in good shape for class. So sometimes that's reviewing old material that's important for them to know. Sometimes that's like a brief introduction to the topic we're doing that day. Sometimes it's connecting it to everyday life. So we recently talked about something called resonance, and that's how antioxidants actually antioxidize. That's what they're doing, is they have resonance structures. So we taught them that. So it's just 12 minutes, and they can do it when they're standing in line at the grocery store or whatever. We try to give them about 24 hours to watch beforehand. And then when we come into class, they're more prepared. But if they don't have time to do that, we still are, we are still presenting the information in class too, but they're just basically getting it twice before they have to do it on their own and do the practice problems. And they're getting it in 2 different formats, and they're getting it from 2 different instructors, because I co-teach with another instructor this semester, because I'm trying to get my PhD finished, and it's a lot of work to write a dissertation. So I teach on the digital platforms, and then my co-teacher teaches in person. So that's how we've set up our semi-flipped classroom. I think the students like it so much, and we've gotten such positive feedback, that in the future, I would like to go further in that direction and maybe do even more on TikTok, and then do more practice problems, have more time for practice problems in class. And then it looks like, I can't see everybody's name, but there's a hand raised.
Dr. Kempen, I think you're next.
Hi, I'm Esther Kempen, and I am Brian's teaching partner. So I teach OChem here, but my classes are much smaller than yours. I also teach Gen Chem, and I was wondering, how would you implement putting your podcast into your class if you were allowed to do so?
I do think I would make it an assignment, whether it was an extra credit assignment or worth points in the base structure. I have not thought much about, but I think I would make it a requirement for them to listen, choose something that's relevant to what we're learning in class, and then have them write up something that they've learned. I have thought about it only very briefly, but that is how I've considered of putting it in. There's a colleague at UNT who does a full semester-long group work project where they have to pick a topic, and every few weeks they have a thing they have to turn in, and then they have a big thing to present at the end of how chemistry relates to everyday life. So that could be something as well. But yeah, it's hard for me to think in a Gen Chem setting. I think in an OChem setting, I would probably require them to listen to it and give me a paragraph or something to show that they've done one topic per chapter, because one of the biggest complaints I get about OChem is it doesn't have any relation to everyday life. So I don't teach Gen Chem very much at all, so I don't really know a ton about how I would do it there. But for OChem, I think I would really focus on, it's important for you to know how this subject matter connects to your everyday life. So I want you to listen and then tell me what you learned to prove that you did it. And they could get around it by Googling, but at least they'll have to write out what they learned about that topic to some degree. So I feel like that could accomplish the goal. Those are just my brief thoughts. I haven't really, I knew I didn't have the freedom, so I used someone else's materials for last semester. I did make my students, this goes back to the diversity, equity, and inclusion theme too. For extra credit, and it was a pretty significant extra credit, I think it was like 3 points on their final grade. I had my students write an essay about a chemist that they identified with in some way, and something about their work and why they identified with that chemist. And so it's kind of similar to like relating it back to yourself. And they really, really loved that essay, and a lot of them did it. And one student who was from, I think it's Thailand, talked about someone who made banana ketchup and why that existed. And someone who was pre-med asked if she could do a doctor, and I said, no, you have to do a chemist because I really want you to see how chemistry relates to you and your interests. And she picked a chemist who had done medical engineering research, and was like, I didn't even know that there was other ways that I could contribute to the medical field, not as a medical professional. So that was a really fun essay that we got to do, but not answering your question.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the questions. This is a really fun conversation. I'm enjoying it.
Awesome. Hey, Melissa, on my end, so Esther and I work together. I teach a lot of the non-majors, so even below the Gen Chem students, the folks that are, majoring in English, history, government, business. We also have a lot of nursing folks that take the introductory course for their prerequisite to go to nursing school. Have you guys incorporated any like instructional items from like third-party publishers like McGraw-Hill, Macmillan, Pearson? There's a lot of things that are out there. Like for me, Esther and I, we actually use our own lecture videos. We both do teach the flipped classroom style. And what I've done is I've linked my videos so that there's statistics that'll give the students a grade based on, completely watching the lecture videos. And then I provide notes, and I let my students take notes before class, and then we jump into problems. I tell stories about, fun things. Like I just finished quantum mechanics and periodic trends yesterday, and I just started, naming compounds, writing formulas in my baby class. And so I think they were really excited about, seeing how some of those things kind of fit together. So when you said storytelling, it kind of, was like, yes, I love it. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and with a class like that, you have more freedom to do the fun stuff, as I like to call it, the like fun side of chemistry, because it's less regulated. But also someone impressed upon me the importance of when you have students in your class who are not science majors, they're going to leave your class and probably never do science again, but they will become voters and they will become members of the public. And if you made them feel like science was accessible, it was valuable, it was interesting, and it is important to support that, then they're going to vote for people and vote for policies that also fund and support science. And that has really been my biggest goal for those classes. I was the TA for general chemistry about 7 years ago. I got to like do the whole lab. It was basically like a demo class. I was just like turning flames colors. But that was my goal. I was like, I want these students to leave this class and believe that chemistry is for them. So that then when something happens, like the pandemic ended up happening, they will trust science and not whatever they hear on the internet. So
definitely. Oh yeah, there's been a lot of that, especially with the non-majors. I focus a lot on problem solving, and we have a nursing program at my camp at Alvin. And so a lot of my students that get into the nursing program, they'll come back and they say, oh wow, I'm so glad you taught me dimension analysis. I'm so glad you stressed sig figs and units and talked about solution concentrations and problem solving. And it was like, yeah, I mean, that's the important thing. You can apply problem solving to your everyday life.
Yes, definitely. And that's one thing I think about a lot with organic chemistry. I mean, my course especially is all the evidence in chemistry education research points to the fact that the current way that we're teaching is not effective. And that's why it has a reputation. Pretty much everyone has heard of organic chemistry, even if they're in or outside of the field. Yeah, raise your hand on here if you've, on your emoji, if you've heard about organic chemistry. And I bet it's a pretty big number. Yes.
Oh, I love organic, so.
Definitely. And so I think a big part of that, and what research shows a big part of that, is that we're not teaching them effectively, and they are not learning much. When they leave the classroom, they're forgetting a ton. So if instead I could teach them how to think about what they're doing, that would be better than me forcing them to memorize a huge range of reactions. And so I definitely think a push towards changing the curriculum to focus on that would really, really benefit probably education in general, but especially the sciences. Awesome. Are there any other thoughts or questions? I think we have about, what, 5 more minutes left?
If you guys want, I can cut the recording so we can go off the record.
I said everything on the record. I'm fine with my thoughts being recorded.
I gotcha.